Is Kristen Lobish, and I'm the Marketing and Outreach Coordinator for NERI Press and Training Center. I want to welcome you to today's webinar, Cultural Sensitivity, Working with Juvenile Sex Offenders and Their Families, presented by our brand new presenter, Alejandro Leguizamo. Before turning this over to Alejandro, I want to take a few minutes to tell you about NERI Press. Our mission is to share cutting-edge research and best practices emerging in our field. For many years, we accomplished that mission only through book sales. But with changes in the last several years in the publishing and technology world, we've been compelled to continue our mission by expanding how we disseminate knowledge. Over the last 6 years, NERI Press has also offered online courses, a free monthly newsletter, in-person trainings, and these webinars delivered by our internationally recognized authors and other experts. It's important to us here at NERI Press and Training Center to hear from you about what kinds of information, training, resources, and books you want and need to be the best professional possible. So please contact us with your suggestions, input, questions, and feedback, whether positive or negative. Just out of curiosity, how many people have participated in a NERI Press webinar before? Okay. So it looks like we're looking at most of you yes, maybe about a third no. So welcome, we're glad to have you here. I'll talk more about this at the end of the webinar, but I'd just like to make the pitch that if you find these webinars helpful, we hope you'll consider becoming a sponsor of our webinar series. Like NPR, it's your sponsorship that helps make this series happen and that allows us to offer our webinars for free to the thousands of clinicians and professionals who have participated in them over the last several years. I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end of our presentation. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to mention the upcoming joint conference hosted by MESAC MATSA in April 2018 in Marlborough, Massachusetts. This year, the conference will be paying special attention to the topic of cultural competence when addressing young persons who engage in and/or victims of sexual harm. This theme will be threaded through the entire conference. Conference organizers hope to address ways to incorporate a culturally competent perspective in all aspects of our work. As you may know, literature indicates that when general mental health treatment is culturally competent or tailored to the culturally specific needs of the individual and family, the result is a better treatment outcome. This is no less the case for specialized mental health treatment services. NERI Press is especially thrilled to be able to offer this webinar in light of the upcoming conference. If you enjoy this webinar, we encourage you to look at some of the other webinars around cultural competence we are offering this spring. For more information about the conference or to register, please visit the website we just had up on the screen, and we hope to see you there. Before we get started with Alejandro's presentation, there are a few more things I'd like to share with you. As with all workshops, here are the learning objectives. We are hoping that participants will be able to identify the various ecological systems in which clients, their families, and ourselves develop, exist, and function, be able to describe the 3 multicultural competencies developed by Sue and Sue, I understand that's a citation, and to be able to identify how to apply the above concepts to specific cases. Right before I turn this over, I want to let you know that the YouTube recording will be posted on our NERI Press website within a week of the webinar's completion. Slides are currently ready to download from the NERI Press webinars page or on the side at the handouts tab, as Tim mentioned. When the workshop is over, please be sure to take 5 minutes, answer our short survey at the end. We would love your feedback. And in about a week, I'll send you a follow-up email with a link to the recordings and to a certificate of attendance that you can download. And now, I will introduce our speaker. Dr. Leguizamo is a psychologist currently in the faculty at Roger Williams University. He was previously the clinical director of the Sex Offender Treatment Program at the Massachusetts Treatment Center. For the past 2 decades, he has been researching, treating, and evaluating adult and juvenile sex offenders. He has also presented research and conducted training workshops in regional and national conferences. I am very excited to have him here today to present this webinar for us, as NERI Press has made an effort this year to include cultural competency as one of our main webinar objectives from audience request. Alejandro, welcome.
Thank you, Christine. Welcome, everybody. And Tim, if you can request my screen. Everybody will be able to see my screen in a now. And here I am as well. Hi, welcome everybody. So we are going to be looking into what goes into cultural sensitivity, cultural competence, cultural humility, how we can interact with our clients in a way that is going to maximize our treatment effectiveness. So Kristen went over the learning outcomes for you and with you, and you have them as well in the PDF that you can download for the presentation. So I will skip right ahead and let's get started right away. So why do we need this multicultural sensitivity? Well, we know that we have an increased diversity in client populations, be it from increased diversity within the US or immigrant populations, despite the current political climate. So we need to be able to interact and reach these clients as best as we can. And, you know, many of us can think, well, I'm a therapist, I'm a good person, I mean well, I was trained, why do I need this? You know, good people going to therapy, we want to help other people. You know, people that don't like other people don't tend to be therapists. Well, let me give you a theory, and this is just my theory, and it has not been tested, but I think it makes sense. So imagine a normal distribution. So regardless of what we're looking at, if we gather data from a bunch of people, we're going to come up with a normal distribution. And if in that normal distribution, we consider acceptance of others, and I don't mean tolerance of others. I don't like that word. I tolerate a little pebble in my shoe. I don't like to refer to use that word with other people, but rather acceptance of others. And if we look at acceptance of others, we get information from many, many people. We will come up with a normal distribution. And what would that look like? Well, very low in acceptance of others, we will have people that belong to hate groups. They don't like anybody else. And we probably wouldn't have anybody that doesn't like anybody else at all, but perhaps one or two. On the other side of the normal distribution, we will have still a few people who really accept everybody else or accept many, many, many people, no questions asked. And there are few. So where does that leave most of us? Most of us are somewhere in the middle. And what does that mean? It means that we mean well and we do our best, but still we have things here and there that perhaps prevent us from accepting others as fully as perhaps we could. And this is not because of necessarily conscious motivations, but rather unconscious messages that we have gotten about other people, things that creep up into the way that we behave that we may or may not be aware of. So becoming aware, that's actually going to become the first skill that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, is something that is needed because we need to base our interventions on our therapeutic relationship with our clients. That is the base for any type of intervention. And whether it's individual, in a group, or with a family, that relationship is the first foundation. And thinking about it, we are asking our clients, we are asking their families to engage in a type of treatment that is particularly unpalatable. In regular psychotherapy, we ask individuals to delve into uncomfortable topics, but here we are looking at the most intimate phenomena that a human being can be engaged in, their sexuality, and what went wrong, and how we can help them address those situations that led them into their current situation. So if we ask them to look into the darkness corners of their mind, we need to have a really good relationship with them in order for them to trust us to go there. Now, with sex offenders, this relationship is also very, very important, and it gets tricky. What does that look like? Do I have to have them call me by my first name or by Mr. or whatever? I think those are superfluous in a sense. This relationship comes by really truly listening to our clients and validating their experience and being able to go through the journey with them. So how do we get to this cultural sensitivity and competence? Well, we need to understand that we come in with some baggage into this relationship. And it is something that we have to, regardless of our background, we have to think about what impact we have in the room. We have to understand that we live in a society that is European focused, where European values are deemed to be ideal and preferable, where there is a white supremacy. That doesn't mean that everybody is going around with torches in a sense, but rather that white is the ideal. White is the system of power. White is represented in most of our government and in positions of power. We are also embedded in a culture that is patriarchal and that favors the male, a culture that is heterosexist, homophobic, and transphobic. And we got to think about how that all of this impacts our clients. Sexism, if you are dealing with female sex offenders, you have to take a look at that as well. But also, if we're dealing with male clients and their families, what their views and attitudes are towards gender as well. And we also need to understand that we represent the individual and institutional systems of power and oppression. So that means that as a therapist, if we are hired by probation, or if we work in a juvenile justice system or elsewhere, we are part of that system. And our clients are not coming to see us in an individual, private setting necessarily, but rather they're being sent. And we are part of the system that makes them go to see us where they may not want to be there in the first place. We need to be aware of this and acknowledge this to our clients if needed. So I'm going to use a couple of frameworks here in order to try to understand ourselves and others. And the first one is the ecological model of development, which was created by Baum-Brenner in the 70s. He was a developmental psychologist, and he moved away from Freud and from psychodynamic individuals that focused on the child and later the mother-child interaction. And he argued that we developed based on our individual characteristics. These are genetic, our abilities, etc., personality. But these individual characteristics interact with our family, our community, our society, and even with our generation. Generation being the last one that he included there. So we don't grow up in a vacuum. We have our own personalities, we have our abilities, and they interact first with our family, and the family can shape the way that we are, the way that we see the world in a certain way, as can the community as we begin to interact with it, and society as well. And also there's going to be a generational component as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. Then we're going to look at the multicultural competencies developed by the Sue brothers, and those are awareness, knowledge, and skills. So those are the two frameworks that we're going to be taking a look at. So let's start with awareness, and I like to include philosophy by South Park because I tend to get all my philosophical things from that program. If you're familiar with it, that's great. And if you're not, check it out. And in a particular episode, Kyle, one of the children, his father was in the Wheel of Fortune, the television program, and he ended up solving a puzzle. He actually didn't solve it, but he ended up saying a racial slur. And of course, there was a lot of commotion, and Kyle went to see Token, who is the only African-American character in the show. Therefore, his name is Token, and told him, dude, I'm so sorry. I get it. This is bad. And Token told him, you don't get it. And Kyle kind of like had to walk away. And later, I won't tell you what happened in the rest of the episode. You can find that on their website. But by the end, Kyle had kind of like come to understand that he didn't quite get it. And at the end of the show, he tells Token, dude, I get it. I don't get it. To which Token replies, you got it. All right. So what does this mean? This is kind of like a Zen moment for us. We have to truly get that we cannot understand the experience of somebody else. We cannot get it. And that will open us to be able to listen to the other in order to learn from their experience. So I can tell you, I am a Latino male. I cannot get what it's like to be a Latina woman in this society. No matter how much I try, I just can't get it. The same thing about being a white woman, an African-American woman, an African-American male, etc., etc. Now, being able to step back and become aware that we truly cannot get it opens us up to the correct information that the other individual can give us. So that frees us from making assumptions about the particular person with whom we're working. And I don't know what you may have been expecting from this webinar. There are many, there's only one book actually about cultural awareness and sex offender work. But that book, as well as others, tend to be somewhat, have a cookbook approach to diversity. So you have chapters, African Americans. Okay, African Americans are like this, and that, and Latinos are like this, and that. And the problem with those approaches, and the reasons why I don't like to do that in the trainings, is that then clinicians from other groups are going to assume that every African American that comes to them, for example, or Latinos that come to them, are going to have those characteristics. Therefore, they're going to have assumptions that are going to get in the way of treatment. For example, I am Latino, and we can make a lot of assumptions about where I'm coming from. We can assume that English is not my first language, and you will be correct because of my accent, or so I'm told that I have an accent. Probably gets worse when we're doing this through the web. One would assume that I'm perhaps religious, that I'm Catholic, that I come from a big family. The family is very important. Of course, for who is family not important? For everybody, family is important. And that I hold macho attitudes, perhaps, that given my age, I'm probably married and have lots of kids, perhaps. And many of them will be wrong. So if I go to a therapist and they're making these assumptions about me, I am not going to be feeling warm and fuzzy about that therapist. So having this openness to the information that our clients can give us will allow us not to make those assumptions, and the client will feel more validated. So first, we need to be aware of the biases that we have, and that is not necessarily a painless idea. We have to think about how we feel about other people, what are the thoughts that come into our mind. One that comes into mind quickly is if you see a bunch of teenagers coming your way, what is your first thought? Is your first thought like, oh my God, they're up to no good? That's a bias. If you're driving and somebody in front of you is driving very slow, what is the first thought that comes to mind? Are you thinking that it's an elderly individual that is driving very, very slow? Again, that's a bias. And this is, everybody does it. I mean, remember that that normal distribution, we're all in the same boat, okay? This is all a process of becoming aware and practicing this every single day. Why do we do things? And this is actually the moment when I throw my wife under the bus, and thankfully she's not here where I am, because she would hate me if she knew. These biases can be so ingrained and unconscious that, for example, my wife, she is very open to other individuals, very accepting. I mean, she married me. She had to be very accepting. She's American. And when we had our daughter, and our daughter was beginning to eat solid foods, she began to one night play a game with my wife. She would try to give my wife a Cheerio, and then she would take it away. And she kept on doing that, and my wife and I were laughing. And my wife all of a sudden says, "Oh, you're such an Indian giver." And that took me aback. And I looked at my wife and I said, what does that mean? Does that mean you're gonna take her to her room and take everything away and not give it back? And she realized what she just said, and was mortified for a little bit. Now, what happens is, this is so ingrained in us that we don't even think about it. What does that mean, Indian giver? I mean, we took everything from Native Americans, so I mean, it really doesn't make sense. But that is how ingrained it is. We also have to be aware of our family. What is the contribution of our family? Did we grow up in an environment that was accepting of others? What are the messages that we got in regards to other people? And interestingly, we also may have to educate our clients into this in regards to these biases, little by little. I have a client now, a teenager, that says something very biased against African Americans. He's a Latino male. And, we had to talk about exactly where that was coming from and do some reality testing in that regard. And the thing with him is that his family had given him these messages. Also, our community, what type of community are we living in? What are the messages that we get from there? Do we have neighbors telling us, our values are going to go up or down depending on who moves in, et cetera, et cetera. And also society. What are the messages that we get? What do we get about the value of other groups, the values of our own group, and how they affect the way that we could interact with our clients? And also generation. Different generations have different levels of vocabulary with other people, different levels of acceptance of others. So depending on our generation, we may have more of a difficult time, or we will have to do a deeper introspection, in a sense, in order to get at what are the messages that we have been getting and what is our frame of reference. Now, we need to have this awareness because we need to make sure that our style is going to be beneficial for the clients that we are serving. And this is whether it is for juveniles or for adults, and also for with families as well. I like to say that I was trained dynamically, and I have some really quirky books. But one of them basically says that in order for the client to progress, the client needs to be able to love themselves or like themselves. And what leads them to get there is for the therapist to be able to like them, to love them, not love them, but love them, to find them lovable. So that means that we have to work through our biases in order to be able to really develop that connection with the client and with their family. We know from the literature that approaches that are empathic, warm, rewarding, directive, and reflective work best. And again, if we find ourselves not being able to be there, to get there with a particular client or their families, we need to ask ourselves what's going on there. Is it something about the client? Is it something about us, and how we can overcome that obstacle? We know that confrontational approaches do not work. It actually leads to people clamping up. And so we need to use a challenging yet supportive approach, where we invite the persons to look at their issues with us in a supportive way. And if they're not being truthful with us, to explore that as well, not in a way that is going to put them off by confronting them, but rather joining in with them about how difficult it is to share information. Supportive and encouraging therapists are more engaging. The clients interact more. There's actually lower levels of denial. Keep in mind that with juveniles and families of different groups, that the engagement of the clients is going to depend on the relationship that you have with them. And the development of that relationship is going to take longer than with somebody that is either from your group, or if you're a minority therapist, somebody from the majority culture who may be more comfortable, or may feel more comfortable with the power setup of the therapy. We also good therapists that the therapy style that works with sex offenders is one that emphasizes emotional expression and validating that expression, and that one that think about is how difficult it is to talk about sexuality and sexual issues with adolescents that may feel very comfortable, or rather very comfortable talking about sex, and with the families as well, validating how difficult it is to talk about these issues with somebody that is outside of their family, to talk about them at all, since in many cultures it's not something that the parents are going to want to talk to a therapist about. To use appropriate self-disclosure, mainly about the process that is happening in treatment. So we are free to discuss that at length during our sessions. I'm finding this session really boring. What about you? For example, and then talk about how that could be changed, or what does it mean that the session is boring? That means that the person is not, or the people are not really participating. But also you can share a lot of things in this placement in order to teach individuals. When I'm dealing with clients, I can talk to them about, well, I know people who, and I may be talking about myself, but they don't know that, and that can help them understand that their experience is not isolated in a sense, but also that more other ways that they could engage in behavior. And overall, utilize a positive and motivational approach. So again, we need to be aware of our biases in order to be able to counteract them, so that we are able to implement therapy in a way that will work with our clients based on what has been found in the literature. So again, this awareness involves significant introspection about how we feel about people that are different from us, or people that are like us, depending on how we feel about our own group. Now, we need to understand that we all there have been theories that talk about various identity developments in regards to ethnicity. All of them talk about going from a place of ignorance of those issues to a place of full immersion and commitment to tolerance, and also to work for social justice. And there are many levels in between, going from benign naivete to some sort of dissonance, something is going on, to acceptance, and then to commitment. So we have to be aware of these issues and how they're going to impact our clients. I can tell you, I'm an immigrant. I came here when I was a teenager, and in order to feel accepted here, I try to highlight my American side. My mother is Italian American, and it took me a while to accept my own minority status. And I had to think about how that impacted the way that I did treatment. How did I see the issues that were affecting my clients? Now, so I'll tell you more later. All right. Understanding the effects of various systems of oppression, and whether it is from the courts, if they're on probation, that they have to pay for probation, that they're under supervision. And granted that we can think that they sort of like they brought it upon themselves because they were charged with a sex offense and they had a legal consequence. That's fair. But also we need to understand that our clients are going to may belong to populations that are received way too much attention from the police, and that they are experiencing those issues more than us. Understanding also how we perpetuate and duplicate the systems, and this one is tricky because some would even think of us giving our clients information or psychoeducation in some ways are duplicating this the system of especially if we are therapists of the majority group, that we are telling the person from the minority group how to do things, and that can be problematic. And actually, we have to weigh that with the research that says that minority populations prefer a more directive approach. So how do we make sense of that? And I think the goal, the best approach here is to make sure that we have a path, a plan with our clients about where we're going to go and how we're going to get there, and working together to devise that plan to make sure that it's palatable to everybody. And especially for families, they are the experts on the youth that with whom we're working, and to allow them to engage them so that everybody can work collaboratively, in collaboration rather. So we have to engage them. We have to develop a plan with them, and appreciate that they're letting us walk with them through this plan. So we can be directive at times, depending on what's going on, but with the understanding that they're the ones that are going to make the decisions, and ultimately they're the ones that are either going to practice or not practice what they're learning in treatment. And also, we have to be committed to ameliorating or eliminating the systems, and that becomes a little bit trickier. I think that in order to do this work, we have to work with those around us in trying to eliminate these systems or trying to lessen their impacts. And that may mean looking at our practices, our community agencies, and try to ameliorate any practices that may end up being oppressive to others. And they can be very subtle, as somebody recommending that the child have a computer in order to do schoolwork, for example, without knowing if the family can afford it, or being able to support the family in what they need, as opposed to as opposed to force them to participate in something that they may not see as valuable. And I'll tell you a little bit more in a little bit. All right, we need to have a non-defensive stance with clients. We need to be willing to explore the clinical, cultural, and systemic. And here is where, when you read about different groups, then this may be something that may help you in assessing whether something is clinical, cultural, or systemic. How is the client communicating with you? Is that a clinical issue, a cultural issue, a systemic, or even something else? For example, I have a client, a teenager from Central America, who has a lot of difficulty talking about about the good things that he's done. So if he gets, he's in a program, if he gets Resident of the Week, he won't tell me about it. And if I bring it up, he starts sort of like grinning and looking down. And that is very cultural, given that he comes from Central America. If he told me about it, he would think that he was boasting, and that's not something that is acceptable. So if he, and a lot of times he clamps up if he's put on the spot, if people ask him questions. So that can be cultural as opposed to clinical, where a client would just be, in a sense, resistant to engage in a conversation with others. But there are times when this might be a little bit more complicated. I had a client from Southeast Asia who didn't make eye contact with me, and I had to ask myself, is this cultural? Because Southeast Asian individuals may not want to make eye contact with somebody in authority, or is there another reason? And the reason that my conclusion was actually that the kid just didn't like me, and he just didn't want to look at me. So even though there may have been some cultural issues, I think there were some issues of liking as well. Transference and countertransference, we need to try to be as aware of them as possible, especially around cultural countertransference. These are issues that are cognitive and affective, emotional, that can influence, or actually do influence, the way that we respond and react to others. If we grow up here, we have a set of American values that are ingrained in us, and we may see other cultures as different and not necessarily not as good, but we may see their practices as being rather strange, or something that may need changing, and that may or may not need to be the case. Now, the issue here with cultural countertransference is that often there's research to support that these are often disavowed by therapists. They can be impactful, and they are perceived by the clients. So we need to try to be as aware as possible, and to be non-judgmental to what the culture of somebody else is. Now, there's also knowledge of our clients, and that involves individually, but family, community, society, and generation as well. And here, we want a full understanding, in as much as possible, of the person and their family functioning. What are their practices? How do they do things? Of their community, where are they living? What influences impacts them there, and how society respond to them. Now, here is where you need to do a lot of homework in order to understand the context of individuals and their families. What is the impact of historical forces? And here we'll be talking about slavery, about convict leasing, about Jim Crow laws, for example, about discrimination faced by different groups, internment of Japanese individuals, anti-Chinese sentiments in the 1800s. And, we may think, well, that happened a long time ago. But in the whole scheme of things, 200 years is not a lot. Is not a lot of time. I saw a program once where the host went into a pickle store in Beijing that has been open for business for 500 years. Now that's a long time, and even then, but there's stuff that has been going on for much longer than that. So the impact of those historical events trickles down to the present. The way that we see, for example, the criminalization of African Americans. What is the origin of that? Well, after slavery was abolished and Reconstruction was happening, the backlash against Reconstruction, which had enabled African Americans to fully engage in Southern society, becoming politicians, setting up schools, etc., Jim Crow laws were the backlash and began to criminalize African American life and began to target African Americans for involvement with the justice system. So African Americans would be arrested, say, for vagrancy, not being able to prove that they were employed. And eventually, the numbers of African Americans began to increase in the criminal justice system, and then people began to conclude that the African Americans were inherently criminal because they were more involved with the criminal justice system. Now, that stereotype has continued to trickle until our present day, even though it was based on something that was outside of the purview of that particular group. Understanding families, these are things that you will need to think about when you're working with families. What are their gender roles? What are their relational and sexual attitudes? What are the power issues in the household? Familismo, if you're dealing with Latino families, but others as well, is the importance of the family. And there's going to be some reluctance to deal with outsiders about family matters and protecting the family against forces that may interfere with the family's functioning. Matriarchal households with single parent households or not, you need to assess for the power differentials and who's going to be the person that is going to be best equipped to enact the recommendations that you're given. Any changes due to immigration, gender roles in particular, can impact what people do in families. So men may become in what they may see as traditionally more female endeavors because of the need by immigrating into the country. Attitudes about homosexuality, if the youth has engaged in homosexual offenses or same-sex offenses, that those are going to be issues that you will need to think about. Attitudes about sexual aggression and offenses. There will be instances where sexual aggression by males may be seen as a positive thing, or it may be seen as the responsibility of the female if it was a heterosexual offense. Other things here, socioeconomic issues, what are the things that are stressing the individual and the family? Those will need to be assessed before any other things can be intervened on. What supports they may have. And this issue of fatalism, kind of like the belief that things are happen by fate and there's really not much that we can do. So you may encounter this sort of passivity in a sense that you may need to work with in trying to get them to try to get individuals and their families to see that, yes, things may be due to fate, but you can change fate by doing things as well. And skills here will be how to implement practices that are suited for diverse clientele. Now, I wish that I could have more information for you, but for adolescents, there's only one study that I could find that assesses the appropriateness of sexual assessment risk measures with diverse adolescents, and that is the JSUB-2. And it was predictive, particularly the dynamic realm of the measure, which is the same for white adolescents. Clearly, more research is needed. There's very little for adults as well, and so work needs to happen in those areas.
Hi, Alejandro. It's
Hi.
Kristen.
Hi.
I wanted to let you know that we want to give a couple minutes for people
Yeah.
to ask questions if they have them. So
Yeah.
we might want to wrap soon since we're coming
Yes.
to the end of the hour.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. It's fascinating. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So for treatment guidelines, just keep in mind that your approach needs to be flexible. What you may need to focus on with your clients, what may be the most beneficial may not have anything to do with sex offender work, but may need to be something else that needs to happen for the individual in order for them to be, in a sense, comfortable. For example, with my Central American client, issues of immigration at times take precedence over any other work that we may be doing. So be as aware of your style as possible, be introspective, acknowledge and address differences, even if you are dealing with individuals that may seem similar to you. Talk about this. I talk with Latino clients about me being Mexican. What does that mean for them? If we're able to work together and to make sure that we understand one another. So right away, and that allows clients to be able to address these issues with us as well. Again, whether assess whether something is cultural, systemic, or a treatment issue, and be open to what your client needs. I think that keep an eye out for microaggressions. There you go. When in doubt, ask. You can ask the client, their family, how do they do things, what is appropriate or not. Do not hold your clients responsible for their culture, but that doesn't mean that you cannot ask them to regard and consider their culture critically in order to try to come up with better ways of doing things. Ask colleagues, resources, email me. I don't know the answer. I will email somebody, and they will email somebody, and we'll get you an answer. And even government agencies or international organizations can give you information about people specifically, particularly from other countries. All right. So sorry I went over time. I would like to have time to answer questions. You have my contact information. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to email me. I'm on email all the time. Okay. Thank you.
Hi, can everybody see me? Am I on board yet?
You are, Kristen.
All right, I am on board. So I wanted to make sure we had a couple minutes to ask questions. So the first one that I got comes in from Gabriella in Indiana. She says she is working in a residential setting with juvenile males, some of whom are sex offenders. How best would you recommend working with individuals who try to use sexual advances or behaviors with female staff as a form of control, as they know that the staff struggle with or become upset with the behavior?
It depends on your level of comfort. And your particular style. I have known female clinicians that can be fairly reverent with their clients, and so they would address this directly and ask the person, what are you doing with this? What are you trying to do? It's not going to work, and what do you think is going to get you? And in order for the person to kind of like back down from that, if they see that the staff is uncomfortable by it, they will use it. They will use it for their advantage, and the staff really needs to be comfortable addressing that directly with them, with humor if possible. Again, it depends on your personality.
Thank you. So I have another one here from Melissa, who says that she is thinking about the culture of inner city youth where prison is cool. And she is wondering about how in prisons perpetrators on young children are not cool with other inmates and how to balance these two cultures.
I think that I would, perhaps the cat would like to have a go at it.
I apologize.
Um, I think that challenging this idea that jail and prison are cool, exploring that with the clients would be important. What is cool about it? What are the good things, and what are, I wouldn't do the pros and cons, but what are the advantages of being in prison, if there are advantages, and what are the advantages of being outside of prison, and what are the stressors, both inside and outside. And I go under the assumption that the great majority of people don't want to be stressed out, and I would venture with them that prison is very stressful. You have to deal with COs, and if nothing else, that would be pretty stressful, but also with other individuals. And when they are talking about individuals who had offended against children, exploring with them this idea of like, why is it that there has to be this hierarchy, quote unquote hierarchy, and why are people's sensitivities more offended by that than, say, rape of adult women, and exploring those issues as well with them, because they might be more open to kind of like sexual aggression against teenagers or adults based on the media messages that they're getting, or messages from their groups, that it's okay to do that, but not children. So we can challenge those as well. What kind of interactions do you want with somebody else? Do you want something that is reciprocal, or do you want something that is going to be one way and is really not going to be as enjoyable in a sense? And if they're doing it for power, how can they get power in a different way?
Thank you. I have one more I'd like to throw at you real quick before we finish up. And that is, I had Erica ask, what curriculum do you use when working with youth who sexually offend?
Usually pathways, and I also like to, well, it's a little bit weird, because the treatment that I do tends to be kind of like weird treatment. I treat individuals in the Massachusetts system that for some reason or another are not benefiting from the treatment that is provided there. So I tend to use different approaches with those individuals. One of them was a young adult that was committed as a sexually dangerous person. I tend to rely mostly on my relationship with them, a relational approach. I like pathways. I'm particularly aligned with the Good Lives model, working either with adults or juveniles more than anything else.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to have to wrap it up, so if everybody can be patient with me. First of all, I want to thank Alejandro for being here. That was a wonderful webinar. I really, really did enjoy it.
Thank you.
And like we said, the slides are available now. We will have video within about a week. So if you'll give me a couple minutes, then I'd be glad to wrap up for us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
So first of all, I wanted to talk a minute about our CE process. Really quickly, we have paid CE credits available for psychologists and social workers for all the webinars in this season. For details on how to get CEs, you can visit us at nearypress.org/webinars and read through our process. If you still have questions after that, you can email me. My email is right on the screen, and it's pretty easy to find me on the Neary Press website. I also would like to let you know that we publish a free monthly newsletter in which we discuss a new or controversial journal article or research paper and examine its implications for clinicians. You are automatically signed up for this, and we hope that you enjoy it. If you like this webinar, please consider sponsoring us. We're thrilled to be presenting these webinars for you, but we would not be able to do it without our sponsors. When you sign up as a sponsor, as a thank you, we will send you 2 of our texts, and if you already have them because you've sponsored before, we will send you 2 different texts. If you sign up as an organization, you are guaranteed 15 seats in each webinar, and as an individual and an organization, each sponsor will be pre-registered by us before the webinar, so you will not have to register yourself. Sponsorship is $98 for individuals and $250 for organizations. If you are interested, please follow the link on the screen or contact info@nearypress.org. Finally, I want to thank you to the sponsors we have now. You can see them on the screen. They are fabulous, and we would not be able to hold these webinars without them, so thank you very much from our hearts. Lastly, if you liked our webinar, you can see our previous webinars at nearypress.org and on our YouTube channel. It is possible to pay for CE credits for all past recorded webinars, and we want to thank you to Alejandro for such a fabulous webinar, and we thank you for being in attendance. And on the screen, you can see when our next webinar is, so hopefully we will see you there. Lastly, please just take our survey, take a couple minutes once we're finished today, let us know how we did, and if you have any suggestions about how we can do next time, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, and have a nice day.